Okay. Let's just talk about disabilities just for a second. One of the things that I find really puzzling as an educator is I don't know if erasing the line between disability and ability is functional. I don't know if it's helpful either. Right now, there's a trend in education just in general to try to blur the lines between these two things. To say that someone is operates differently as opposed to someone has this blah, blah, blah disability. Okay. Once again, another one of these ideas that sounds really good. Appeals to the masses. As an educator, when it comes to fixing problems that people have, how do we fix problems if we start declaring them to not be problems in the first place? So when someone, for example, says, I'll just use a really basic example like dyslexia as well. If someone says, well, to be dyslexic is a thing, okay, it's not a big deal. It's just a different way to read. Okay, so are we saying that there's a correct way to read and you're not doing it?
Right.
Or are we saying that, no, as long as you can get the job done, that's fine? I find it really confusing because the system in general, I'm just purely kind of going on a tangent here about education. The system operates off of doing things the right way and then doing things the wrong way because we will correct you if you're doing it the wrong way.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's trying to tell people that, no, there's 1,000 different ways to do things.
Yeah.
But you're doing it wrong, according to us. And that's fine, apparently, until we go to correct you on it. So it's kind of contradictory. I don't know if it's constructive to tell someone who, I don't know, has a mute disability or someone who can't talk, that there's nothing wrong with that. Because if we say that, yeah, there's just a different way of being, is a different way of existing, will that not discourage any research and any attempt to possibly lead to a cure for that illness or that malady that you have? That's the danger I see in writing things off and saying that, yeah, no, that they're just a different way to be. Don't worry about it. It's fine. As long as you can function differently, that's fine. To me, that's dangerous because if we do that, it discourages research and it discourages if you can't solve problems that you don't identify. Right? So do you think that we should still try to fix things? Or do you think that we should adopt everything into a new norm and kind of try to be inclusive overall? Because that's the term we're really talking about here is just inclusion in general, right? What do you think?
Well, first of all, it would be correct and incorrect, not right and wrong.
Right.
If you're a mute and you're perfectly happy being a mute and you can live your life and you're doing what you like to do and you're fulfilled in what you are doing, then by all means, you don't ever have to talk. But if you want to take on a job where you speak, then the correct way to do it is to learn how to speak. If you're dyslexic, and I would never say that we're going to write off the boundaries. It's good to understand every situation. Understanding is the key to all of this. Understanding why they became dyslexic in the first place, what caused it, how can we get to the root of it, and can we actually get rid of it? If that's what they want. If they're perfectly happy being dyslexic, by all means. But if they say, hey, I want to be a scientist, well, there is a correct way to read a scientific paper. If you're reading it backwards, it can confuse you. It's not that you're bad or good. It's not wrong or right. It's that in this situation, if your desire is to read the scientific paper, then you must learn how to do it correctly. And that's not saying anything negative about you as a human being.
No, that's right.
That's not saying you're less than or inadequate in any way. It's just saying you're not equipped. So if I wanted, I use this example in my podcast with Greg, if I wanted to operate a crane, I had to do it correctly. And if someone's like, you're not doing it right, well, I like my way. And you offend me when you tell me that.
That's right.
That's not helpful.
Well, sometimes you have to run the risk of being offensive to get to the truth.
Of course.
Right? Sometimes you do have to run that risk because if you don't risk saying what needs to be said, sometimes you tend to omit some very important things, right?
Exactly.
Another good example of something like that would be like a speech impediment, for example. If you have a lisp or if you have a stammer or something like that, are these things that, because right now there's a tendency in education that I won't say they're not trying to fix it because there still are speech pathologists and stuff like that that are operating in the system, but there's a far less emphasis on it must be corrected as opposed to we must adapt in order to, kind of like the Borg, we must adapt in order to best service them. once again, I find that's a dangerous road to go down, just in terms of like, or not even, I shouldn't use the word dangerous. It's an inconsiderate road to go down. Because it's human nature to poke fun of people that are different.
Sure.
It's human nature to...
I would argue that, though. That comes from the inadequacy we feel.
Yeah, and 100%.
I have no desire to poke fun at people who are different in any way, because I don't feel inadequate about myself. When I was younger, I did.
100%.
So
well, I was going to say, I would be 100% lying here if I said I didn't make fun of things that I probably shouldn't have when I was a kid.
Exactly.
And whether that's based in inadequacies, could be. I certainly wasn't aware of that when I was a kid.
Yeah, same.
Right? Yeah. If you asked me, what's wrong with you, Josh Boy, when I was a kid, I would have been, nothing, boy, I'm perfect. What about you? What's wrong with you?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But in terms of like a stammer or a stoppage in the speech or whatever, these are things that I do think probably should be corrected.
Sure.
If possible. I'm a strong proponent of that. I think that, if someone does have a stoppage in their speech, you should take them out of the class and give them some one-on-one training to get that rectified. Yep. As opposed to trying to convince 20 other students to accept him for what he is.
Yeah.
Because really the reason we're not fixing him is because it costs $60,000 to have a speech pathologist in the building, and we can't afford that.
Yeah.
So let's get all of you guys to change your mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a sinister thing that's kind of wrapped up in a nice rosy blanket of inclusion, right?
Again, it comes down to explanation and understanding. When that kid develops this stutter or whatever when they're young, you would explain to them, listen, throughout your life, you're going to want people to understand what your thoughts are. And the best way to do that is to be able to articulate what your thoughts are. And if you want help doing that, we will help you.
Yep.
But if you don't care about being understood, then by all means, go stutter and do what you want to do, whatever makes you feel good. We're still going to take care of you. We're still going to feed you. We're still going to clothe you. And we're still going to give you energy and heat and love and all the things you want. But if you want ever to be in a position where you need to speak to someone else, if you want to have that power, essentially, if you want to have that ability to articulate your thoughts properly, then you're going to need work. And it doesn't mean you're less than us. It just means you're different. And so we'll define it as like, yeah, you have a stutter. That's what we call it, so we can understand it and work to remedy the situation. But it's not to put you in a box different from anybody else, because everybody has these labels. We all have these labels, but all these labels are not the permanency of what we are. The permanency of what we are is the true loving beings that we are at our core. So if everybody understands that, then everybody can take on labels. Like you could label me in certain ways, and you could label you in certain ways, but we aren't our labels. Those are just things about us. But at our core, they're just characteristics. If you have a stutter, it's just a characteristic. And if you want to ever be a public speaker, then you're going to need to work on that characteristic. And it doesn't say anything about who you are and the value of what you are. It just says that if your desire is to articulate, then you need to practice.
So what you're saying essentially is there's no such thing as undesirable or desirable traits. It's only relative.
It's relative
compared to what you want to do.
There's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There's what you want. It's all up to you. You're here to live your human experience, and depending on how you want to live it, other people will help you achieve that.